Hey designers, welcome to a brand new series where we'll be starting from scratch and designing our own social media graphics using our own unique universal style across each post. For this series, we'll be diving into the NBA playoffs and creating multiple graphics that span across different mediums and cover all the areas needed to keep our social media viewers and followers up to date. The style I chose for today and this series is a grungy sort of rustic vintage style that has high energy and dramatic effects. To me, this is perfect and describes the NBA playoffs, and it should be a lot of fun to create. We're going to start by kicking things off with the game day matches. This graphic style is super fun to do and can be executed in very unique ways. We're going to be highlighting three main principles in our graphics for today. Number one, we're going to need to make sure that the star players for each team is our focal point. These players are the faces of their respective teams, and all eyes are currently on them. So making these players our focal point draws our audience's attention in a very simple yet effective way. Number two is we need to provide all necessary information in an eligible way that still fits within our style. This includes the teams that we'll be playing, what game they're on, who's up in this series, and words like NBA, playoffs, conference, finals, the date, and etc. And finally, we need to make sure everything is cohesive and fits with our grungy electric style. So without further ado, let's get into our first graphic for today. So the dimensions for our document that I'm going to be using is 2100 by 2100 with a resolution of 72. It's going to depend on what social media platform you're using. I'm just going to be using Twitter, so anything with a similar side should be good. And every element that I'm going to be using today will be in a folder linked in the description, so if you want to check that out and use the same elements that I'm using for practice, feel free to do that. Put it in between our rip paper, and we're going to erase the excess to the outside because we do not need that. And this will keep our style pretty similar. You could have a different type of texture in the middle here, but I think it still looks nice. I don't know why the rip paper and this black grungy texture seem to work with each other, but it does. And so we're going to get rid of the outside here. So the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to make our teams nice and big and fill this entire space. This will bring our secondary focal point to the teams that are playing. And I think this is a very nice and subtle way to grab that attention. I really do like these emblems. It does have a nice contrast, a nice shiny contrast. It does look nice. And to follow that up, we're going to add a drop shadow on this type of background. We're going to be having a lot of drop shadows and a lot of shadows around the edges and off our paper here just to add more depth. So speaking of that, let's grab our brush tool and let's do some type of drop shadow here. We're going to do a very dark gray, and we're just going to paint a slight shadow along the outside of our ripped paper here. Nothing too drastic, but it does add a lot to it. You can increase the size, make it softer, and then you can go in here and change the opacity just a little bit. I'm going to do around 85. Just adds that subtle drop shadow that really does add a lot of dimensionality to it. And also in a similar way, we're going to add that type of shadow along the outer edges here. We're going to be taking the colors of the teams and just getting a dark color of that and just doing a slight shadow of a different color, making adjustments to the color in different spots. Adding a nice bright gold here and there. Maybe at the top here. And on the side. Can do one on this side too. Oh, making sure it doesn't go into the other team though. And then we're going to do the same thing with the Nuggets. Just a slight colored shadow around the edges. This will really pop when we add our final grungy texture over the top. We're going to change the color to a little brighter, add a couple highlights here and there. And there we go. And then to further enhance that depth, we're going to add 2 clipping masks to both of our ripped paper edges. And we're just going to take our brush, make it small here, get our dark gray, black color. We're just going to paint some shadows on to our paper here. to give it a little more dimensionality. It's a little flat right now. You don't have to add too much. Just a nice little subtle dark shadow along the edge should do. It is a little flat, and we're gonna change the opacity, change the blend mode if needed. But this just adds some good depth, some good shadows in a very, very slight way. So we're gonna see if we need to change the blend mode at all. I think normal looks nice. And then here's the difference. I mean, you can just the slight shadow adds a lot of dimensionality. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do some adjustments on all the imagery and all the layouts. I think we need to make our emblems and this bottom texture here a little bit smaller and a little bit down more, because it is drawing a little bit too much attention to itself. And then we're going to just further enhance the focal point on the players. We're going to make them a little bigger. Make sure they're still centered. Make sure they're still relatively the same size to each other. We don't want to draw more attention to one player than the other. Move the bronze head over a little bit. I'm going to make Jokic just a little bit bigger, as he is a little smaller than James. I kind of compare their head sizes. That's the best way that I've found to do it. And then we're going to do the same thing for this center. We're going to make it a little bit bigger to give ourselves some space. So we're going to grab all these elements, make it very big, try and get it as centered as possible. And that is perfectly centered. And there we go. And now we can start adding our text. So as far as our text, I found this style online. It has a really nice grunge style to it and shows the underlying layer in a very nice way. And it has editable and different mediums of grunge. We have the light mode, which I'm going to stick with, but you can also go medium for more grunge and even stronger. For legibility purposes, we're going to go with light here. And it's super nice because it's a smart layer and it brings you to a new document where it can be hard to see, but that's because it's on white and we need white. But you can take each element and edit it easily, changing the game, changing who's up in the series, from Western to Eastern. So just make sure you save it out each time and then go back to the document. It should be updated. Super nice text. I really like it. I've used it. I'm going to use it for every single style and every single graphic that we create. So some final things we're going to do is we're going to be adding some of our textures over top of our imagery to give it that really unique style that can be universally put on every single graphic that we create. We're going to take just our simple grungy background and we're going to put it over the top of our players, and we're going to change our blend mode to screen and drop our opacity just down to 60-50%. That just adds a little bit of a texture, especially in the lighter areas. But for the real style, we're going to be adding this texture, also linked in the description. This is a really cool rustic style. I really enjoy this one. We're going to change it to color dodge to really make some of those elements pop. And we're going to be editing it to fit in areas that it looks nice in. We don't want it to be covering our players' faces, so we're going to have to be changing that. But yeah, you just kind of want to move it to wherever you think looks best. And then add a mask here. Take your brush and just get rid of it where it's on people's faces or in areas where it's hard to read. I think something like this looks nice. Do just a little bit more down here. So the final thing before we get into a raw camera filter, and I encourage everyone to do this, is we need to group all our elements that share the same thing together. This makes it super easy to swap out elements because we do have different teams. We do have the Heat and the Celtics that we need to put in here. So it's easy to drag the Heat into here and the Celtics into here and knowing where it's at, changing their player imagery, changing the text if we need to. I just grouped everything together that seemed to fit well. And yeah, we can now add a raw camera filter. So as far as our raw camera filter, I like to keep it simple. I like to add some things that just make it a little more dramatic. We're going to bump up the exposure, we're going to bump up the contrast. That makes it more dramatic. And then as far as the whites, the only thing I would just decrease the whites. They do get a little bright, especially when the team has a white jersey or we do have a white individual as in Jokic. It just gets a little too bright. And then we're just going to increase our texture and clarity just slightly because we do have a lot of textures going on right now and we don't need to boost that even further. And you can do the same thing with the effects. As far as grain, I wouldn't change that at all. It just gets too textured, too distracting. Just leave it down. We already have enough texture on here. And then you can add sort of a darkened circle around here by changing this slider. I don't change it too much, around 17, 20, something like that. If it gets too dark, then it just like takes away from the players, takes away from the teams. So something slight around negative 15. And then another thing I like to do is I like to bump up the vibrance and turn the saturation down. I never turn saturation up. It just makes colors look ugly. Vibrance is the way to go if you want colors to pop a little more, not saturation. It makes it look really ugly. So those are our final camera raw filter settings. And as you can see, the difference is pretty slight, but it adds a little more dramatic feel to it. Here's off, here's on. Adds a little more darkened dramatic filter, which we want for this type of graphic. And there we have it, our first graphic for the series. It looks so awesome. We've got tons of energy and a dramatic feel that really does showcase what the NBA playoffs are all about. Every element used today will be linked in the description below in a folder. I do not take credit for creating any of these elements. I used Adobe Stock and Google for the players. We just created a whole new unique style that will be used in all of our graphics and posts throughout this series. If you want to see more, please leave a like on the video as it helps tremendously. That's all for today. I'm Josh, and thank you for watching.